The chamber was vast, a hollowed-out moon converted into a meeting place for the most powerful species in the galaxy. The air thrummed with tension as representatives from the Zalari Dominion, the Varaki clans, the Ithari Ascendancy, and dozens of other alien civilizations gathered in the circular war room. For the first time in recorded history, species that had warred for centuries sat side by side, not out of diplomacy, not out of peace, but out of fear. Fear of humanity. Seated at the central podium, High Strategist Zarek of the Zalari Dominion activated a holographic display. It showed a series of battle reports, skirmishes, fleet engagements, planetary invasions. The images shared one common theme. The alien forces should have won, and yet they had not. Zarek's mandibles clicked together in frustration. Explain to me, how does a species barely 500 years into space travel consistently outmaneuver and overpower empires that have ruled for millennia? The question lingered in the air. No one wanted to answer. Finally, a Varaki warlord, his exoskeleton adorned with ceremonial scars, spoke in a guttural voice. Their ships are inferior. Their fleets lack coordination. And yet, they win. Over and over. The Ithari delegate, a being of shimmering energy, pulsed with agitation. Perhaps we have underestimated their technology? A snort of derision echoed from the far side of the chamber. Technology? Scoffed General Vren of the Zalkar Imperium. They steal and repurpose everything they touch. They don't innovate. They adapt. Zarek raised a clawed hand to silence the murmurs. Then we must understand how they fight. Strategist Talvek, present your findings. A Zalari tactician stepped forward, activating another projection. This one displayed a rotating model of a Terran fleet, battered but still operational, surrounded by the wreckage of ships twice their size. The humans lack overwhelming firepower, Talvek began, yet they possess an uncanny ability to exploit weaknesses. Where we wage wars of attrition, they fight with unpredictability. Their forces rarely engage in direct combat unless necessary. Instead, they strike at supply lines, communications, and chain of command. A murmur of unease spread through the council. No race in the galaxy fought this way. Wars were meant to be grand, orderly clashes of might. The humans did not follow this logic. Talvek continued, his voice laced with something almost like admiration. They think differently. Their strategies are erratic, but not without purpose. When cornered, they become even more dangerous. I have studied their history. Every time humanity has faced extinction, they have emerged stronger. They do not break. They adapt. The Withari delegate's form flickered with uncertainty. Then we must eradicate them before they have time to evolve further. Zarek nodded. That is why we are here. The Dominion proposes a united front. A full-scale war. We will strike before humanity can prepare. No half measures, no treaties. We wipe them from the stars before they become unstoppable. The council chamber fell silent. One by one, the representatives gave their agreement. The greatest war in galactic history had just been declared, and humanity had no idea what was coming. The attack came without warning. A combined force of over 50,000 warships descended upon human-controlled space, striking deep into the Sol Confederation's outer colonies. Planets burned as kinetic bombardments turned cities into craters. Orbital defenses, though advanced, were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Entire fleets were caught in ambushes, torn apart before they could mount a defense. From a tactical standpoint, it was a masterstroke. The alien coalition, for the first time in history, had moved as one. Coordinated, decisive, merciless. Yet something was off. High Strategist Zarek watched from the command deck of the Dominion flagship Tyrannus as the human colonies fell. It was too easy. This should be more difficult, Zarek muttered, watching the holographic reports stream in. Where are their counterattacks? Their misdirection? Their unpredictability? The answer came 2 days later. It began as a minor disturbance. Communications relays disrupted, supply routes mysteriously cut off. Coalition ships started vanishing from their designated patrol zones, as if swallowed by the void. Then came the sabotage. On the occupied colony of Vega Prime, Coalition forces awoke to find their own war machines turning against them. Orbital platforms fired on friendly ships, supply caches detonated, and key command structures collapsed in carefully timed explosions. The humans had let them take the planet without a fight. Then, in the dead of night, they took it back. At first, the Coalition dismissed these as isolated incidents, until they became the norm. Fleet movements were anticipated and intercepted before they could strike. Entire battalions disappeared, only to reappear days later. Dead, with no signs of battle. Coalition generals struggled to comprehend what was happening. The humans were losing on paper, yet somehow winning the war. And then came the real horror. Aboard the Tyrannus, strategist Talvek analyzed intercepted human transmissions. What he found sent a chill through his carapace. "High strategist," he said slowly. "The humans, they are not fighting as we do. They are not treating this as a war of honor or dominance." Zarek turned sharply. "Explain." Talvek hesitated. "They are treating it as total war. No battle lines, no distinctions between front and rear. Every human, soldier or not, is part of the resistance. They are fighting us not in open war, but in a war of attrition, deception, and psychological warfare. They expected to lose the first battles. They are setting traps on a scale we cannot comprehend." As if on cue, a new report arrived. A coalition fleet of 200 warships had entered a seemingly undefended human system. Within minutes, the entire fleet was reduced to debris. No enemy fleet had been present. Instead, a gravity-based weapon hidden within the planet's core had been detonated, creating a catastrophic singularity that consumed everything in its path. They had walked straight into a death trap. Zarek clenched his mandibles. They let us take the first move. But the real war is only beginning. Panic rippled through the coalition ranks. For all their military might, they were fighting an enemy that refused to meet them on traditional battlefields. Their strategies were unraveling, their morale crumbling under the weight of an enemy that did not fight like an empire, but like a force of nature. Humanity had been here before. Throughout their history, they had fought wars where survival hinged, not on strength alone, but on adaptation. Against impossible odds, in trenches, jungles, deserts, and ruins, they had learned to turn disadvantages into weapons. The Coalition, with its rigid hierarchies and predictable strategies, had never encountered an opponent like this. Now, the humans were teaching them a lesson in asymmetric warfare. On the occupied colony of New Damascus, the Veraki warlord Strick-Ka moved cautiously through the city's ruins. His forces had crushed the human garrison within hours of arrival, yet the victory felt hollow. Something was wrong. His soldiers were being hunted. It had started with whispers, messages scrawled in alien blood on walls. "You are not safe. We are still here." Then, one by one, his soldiers began disappearing. Patrols would go out and never return. Supply depots would explode in the night. Even their own automated defenses turned against them. The humans were not reclaiming New Damascus through military force. They were erasing the invaders, making them fear the very air they breathed. Strick-Ka's claws flexed anxiously as he peered through his visor. His advanced optics should have been able to detect movement anywhere within a kilometer, yet they showed nothing. The city was a wasteland. And yet, he could feel eyes on him. A faint sound. A whisper of motion. And then, darkness. His last thoughts were of how silent the humans had been, how they had taken their time, how, despite all his victories on other worlds, he had never once fought an enemy he could not see, and now, he never would again. In the war room of the Tyrannus, High Strategist Zarek stood motionless as another fleet's destruction was confirmed. He had underestimated humanity. They had all underestimated them. Coalition ships were now unable to move freely without fear of ambush. Supply lines had been severed, and fuel shortages had begun crippling their war efforts. What had started as a swift campaign to crush a minor species had turned into a grinding, psychological nightmare. And then the unthinkable happened. A human fleet, smaller than anything the Coalition would consider a threat, appeared in the heart of Zilari space. At first, the homeworld's defense fleets dismissed them, until one of their moons simply vanished. Not destroyed, not bombarded, gone. The remaining fragments, analyzed later, suggested some kind of molecular destabilization weapon. Technology the Coalition had never seen before. Humanity, it seemed, had been keeping its true advancements hidden until now. A single transmission followed. A simple human voice, calm and unshaken. "You came to exterminate us. Now we are coming for you." The war had turned. And for the first time, the Coalition understood the true horror of what they had awakened. The Coalition had expected a war of conquest. What they found instead was a war of annihilation. Except it was they who were being annihilated. In the grand war rooms of the Dominion's High Command, fear had become a tangible force. The once mighty Coalition, composed of dozens of powerful alien species, was unraveling under a campaign unlike any they had ever faced. Their vast fleets, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, were being bled dry. Supply chains were collapsing. Morale was crumbling, and the worst part? They could not even see the enemy that was tearing them apart. But to understand why this war was spiraling out of their control, they needed to understand something far more terrifying. Humanity had been preparing for this war long before it ever began. For centuries, the great interstellar empires of the galaxy had expanded, conquered, and warred amongst themselves, assuming they were the pinnacle of military evolution. Strategy was dictated by strength, by overwhelming force, by sheer numbers and technological superiority. And then there was humanity. Alone in the void, cut off from the great galactic civilizations for most of its history, humanity had evolved in ways no other species had. Their wars were not fought for territory alone, nor for the honor-bound duels of warrior cultures. No, humanity's wars were fought for survival, in the mud, in the ruins of civilizations, in the dead silence of space. Their greatest conflicts had been brutal, unpredictable, and asymmetrical. They had never been the strongest species, nor the fastest, nor even the most technologically advanced. But they were something far worse to an enemy. They were relentless. While the Coalition's war doctrines were built around grand fleet engagements and overwhelming force, humanity had long mastered the art of winning wars before they even started. Sabotage, psychological warfare, deception, total and unrelenting attrition. And now, for the first time in galactic history, an enemy was about to experience what happened. When humanity was backed into a corner, Coalition warlords issued new orders: bring overwhelming force to bear, crush the humans before their insurgency spread any further. And so, the great fleets moved, deploying entire armadas to occupied human colonies. They expected to fight planetary rebellions. They expected to face scattered resistance forces. Instead, they found nothing. Entire cities had been abandoned overnight, infrastructure left intact, and yet no human presence remained. Coalition commanders were confused. Where were the insurgents? The answer came days later, when the fleet sent to secure these planets began disappearing. It started small. A single battleship, reporting a sensor malfunction, vanishing from long-range communications. Then, an entire squadron, its distress beacon blinking once before falling silent forever. At first, they suspected sabotage. But as the pattern continued, something far more terrifying became clear. The humans were not defending their planets. They were using them as bait. Across the occupied systems, human forces were setting traps of unimaginable scale. A fleet would enter a system, detect nothing but silence, and assume control, only for a hidden weapons array, buried in planetary crust, to detonate and consume the entire armada in an artificial gravity collapse. Another fleet would attempt to garrison a colony, only to find the atmosphere laced with nanite weapons, silent, invisible swarms that reduced entire ships to drifting husks overnight. And then, the worst of it, the psychological war. Coalition soldiers began reporting voices over their comm systems. Not static, not distress signals, but whispers, messages in their own languages, warnings, threats. You are already dead. Run while you still can. We are watching you. Many dismissed it as human deception, until entire battalions began turning their weapons on each other in sheer terror. convinced they were being hunted by an enemy they could not see. They weren't wrong. The humans were there. They had always been there, and they were waiting for the coalition to break. The turning point came when High Strategist Zarek, desperate to regain control of the war, ordered the largest fleet ever assembled to push into the Sol Confederation's core territories, over 500,000 warships. This would be the decisive moment. Either humanity would finally be crushed, or the coalition would lose everything. For 3 weeks, the Great Armada pushed forward, burning through what remained of human defenses, bypassing abandoned space stations and moving ever closer to Earth itself. And yet, there was no resistance. Not a single fleet met them in open battle. Not a single warship attempted to block their advance. It was eerily silent. Then, as the coalition forces reached the Sol system, they received a single transmission. A simple human voice. Calm, steady, and final. You wanted war. Now you will have it. Then the trap was sprung. From the depths of space, they emerged. Not warships. Not fleets. Something else. Something far worse. The coalition had assumed humanity's greatest weapon was their technology, their cunning, or their adaptability. They were wrong. The real weapon had been in development for centuries. A silent project hidden away in the black depths of space. And as the Dominion's grand fleet watched in horror, the void itself seemed to open, swallowing entire warships in an instant. Humanity's final secret had been unleashed. The Dominion's Grand Armada, 500,000 warships strong, had reached the doorstep of Sol. For centuries, no species had ever mounted a direct assault on humanity's home system. The coalition believed this would be the moment they broke the humans once and for all. Instead, it would be the moment the galaxy learned why no one should ever push humanity to the brink. As the first wave of the Dominion fleet crossed the outer boundary of the Sol system, their sensors screamed warnings that made no sense. Gravity fluctuations spiked to impossible levels, distortions rippling across space like invisible tidal waves. Ships vanished from long-range scans, not destroyed, not disabled, simply gone. The first assumption was a cloaking field, an advanced, human trick to blind their sensors. But then the distortions moved. Something was shifting in the void itself, not merely hiding but actively consuming their ability to perceive it. Admiral Zarek, leading the coalition fleet, barked orders for the warships to adjust formation, to tighten their defenses. But his command was cut off by a new, chilling transmission. Not from humanity, not from any known source. It came from deep space, from nowhere and everywhere at once. A sound, a whisper of static and something else. Something cold, ancient, and patient. We have waited long enough. Then the stars went dark. The Dominion had come expecting a decisive final battle. Instead, they had walked into something far worse. For centuries, humanity had known that open war against the larger, more powerful galactic empires would eventually come. They had prepared, not in the way their enemies had, by building the biggest ships, the largest fleets, or the most powerful weapons. No, humanity had built something else. In the uncharted voids beyond the outer planets, hidden within the gravitational chaos of Sol's dark zones, they had constructed an entire fleet that defied conventional warfare. These were not traditional warships. They were unlike anything the coalition had ever encountered. They had no standard energy signatures, no easily detectable mass, no predictable movement patterns. Because they were not ships in the conventional sense. They were war forms, adaptive, shifting entities of technology and something beyond, an evolution of war itself. Each was designed with one purpose: to erase any force that threatened the existence of humanity. They did not fight in formations. They did not fire traditional weapons. Instead, they moved like living things, slipping between the gaps in reality, appearing and disappearing between the Dominion's own ranks. They consumed entire warships without a single shot fired. The Dominion fleet had prepared for every form of traditional combat, be it long-range artillery duels, close-quarters boarding actions, or planetary invasions. They had not prepared for this. In the first 60 seconds of engagement, 50,000 ships ceased to exist. No explosions, no debris. Just empty void where warships had once been. Then came the chaos. Mass panic overtook even the most hardened commanders as their ships registered false readings. Massive objects approaching, then vanishing. Sensor data looping in impossible sequences. The Dominion fleet tried to fire at these readings, but every shot hit nothing but empty space. The moment they focused their weapons on one anomaly, another one appeared behind them. Then, the real horror began. Entire battleships suddenly found their internal atmosphere ripped away. Hulls remained intact, engines still ran, but their crews suffocated in seconds. Other ships, their reactors perfectly stable, shut down instantly, left drifting like tombs. Command ships, the very nerve centers of the fleet, had their communication networks infiltrated. Captains and admirals heard whispers over their systems, not from their own people, but from something else. You cannot win. We were patient. Now it is your turn to fear. Panic spread like wildfire. The Dominion fleet began firing blindly, launching barrages of plasma and nuclear warheads in every direction, trying desperately to hit something. Anything. But the war forms did not operate on conventional physics. They phased between attacks, shifting in ways no coalition sensors could predict. One moment, they were nothing but shadows against the void. Then, in the blink of an eye, they materialized inside Dominion vessels, their forms bursting through. Bulkheads, consuming entire decks in total silence. Crew members vanished mid-scream, their bodies pulled into the very fabric of the war forms. It was not war. It was annihilation. Admiral Zarek watched in horror from his command bridge as the largest fleet in galactic history was unmade before his very eyes. His own flagship, one of the mightiest war machines ever constructed, was suddenly alone. All surrounding vessels were gone, either destroyed or simply missing. For the first time in his long military career, Zarek felt true, primal terror. Then, his ship's systems went dead. Every console, every screen, every weapon, offline. And then, they appeared. Not humans, but the war forms. They emerged from the darkness of space as if stepping through reality itself, their forms shifting between solid and intangible. No weapons, no traditional armor plating, because they did not need them. One of them, larger than the rest, drifted closer to the bridge. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, reflections of stars bending around it. Then, for the first time, it spoke. This war is over. The voice was not human, not artificial. It was something else, something new. Zarek, trembling, mustered the last of his defiance. "We are the Dominion," he rasped. "We do not surrender." The war form tilted its head. "Then, you will not exist." And then, in the silence of space, the Dominion's supreme flagship, along with its admiral, simply ceased to be. By the time the remnants of the coalition fleet retreated from the Sol system, only a fraction of them remained. They had lost more than just ships, more than just soldiers. They had lost the illusion that they were untouchable. For centuries, the great empires of the galaxy had believed humanity was weak, that they were a species to be conquered. Now, they understood the truth. Humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. Waiting for the moment they could reveal the true reason they always win. Not through brute force. Not through superior numbers, but through something far worse. A war that no enemy could ever hope to understand. And now, the galaxy finally understood one thing with absolute certainty. Never push humanity too far, because when you do, you may not live to regret it. The battle was over. The greatest fleet in galactic history had been annihilated. Not defeated, not forced into retreat, erased. Only scattered remnants of the Dominion Armada remained, limping away from the Sol system, their comm channels filled with whispers of the dead. The survivors carried not just the story of defeat, but the weight of something far worse: fear. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy knew terror at the hands of humanity. And humanity was not celebrating. They were watching, waiting, and deciding what came next. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. Every empire, every ruling council, Every intelligence agency struggled to comprehend the scale of what had happened. 500,000 ships, gone. Hundreds of worlds had contributed to that fleet, their most advanced warships, their greatest minds in strategy, engineering, and warfare. And yet, none of it had mattered. It wasn't just that they had lost. It was how they had lost. No one had seen human weapons. No one had seen human fleets engage in traditional battle. The war had simply stopped, like a nightmare that had devoured everything in its path, leaving nothing behind but silence. The Dominion's war councils, once so sure of their empire's inevitable triumph, were in chaos. The supreme strategist of the Dominion, a creature named Varsak, locked himself within his war chamber, playing the battle recordings over and over, searching for an answer that didn't exist. There were no weaknesses, no countermeasures. The Dominion had never even landed a single hit. Varsak, once the most feared mind in the galaxy, was now a broken figure, muttering the same words again and again. They were never fighting us. They were waiting for us to come. For the first time in Dominion history, a full military blackout was declared, not to prepare for a counterattack, but to prevent mass panic. While the galaxy reeled from the shock, humanity did not broadcast their victory. They did not send demands. They remained silent. It was the silence that terrified the other species the most, because it meant that whatever humanity had unleashed, it was still there. The war forms had vanished. Not a single trace of them remained. In the aftermath, no debris, no wreckage, nothing to reverse engineer. The surviving Dominion captains had tried to explain, but their testimonies were dismissed as madness. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't follow the rules of war? How do you prepare for something that exists outside of your understanding? Humanity's strength had never been their fleets, their soldiers, or even their technology. It had been their mentality. They had always known they were outnumbered. They had always known that one day, the rest of the galaxy would come for them. So, they had never played by the same rules. They did not build weapons to win battles. They built weapons to end wars before they even started. And now, every empire in the galaxy was beginning to understand humanity had already won. Days after the failed invasion, the Dominion's hold on the galaxy began to fracture. Whispers spread across the empire. It started on the outer colonies, among the lower-ranking officers and planetary governors. They had sent everything they had against Earth, and lost without a fight. The Dominion had ruled through fear, through the promise that they were invincible. Now, that illusion was shattered. Rebellions ignited overnight. Worlds that had once cowered under the Dominion's rule rose up. They had seen what humanity could do. And now, they realized something that changed everything. If the Dominion could be wiped out so easily, then maybe they weren't the greatest power in the galaxy after all. Maybe they never had been. Across the Dominion's core worlds, military officers vanished as factions began turning on each other. Entire fleets abandoned their posts. Planets once loyal to the Dominion declared independence without firing a single shot, because they knew no Dominion reinforcements were coming. They had all been destroyed. Within a single month, the Dominion was collapsing. Amidst the galactic chaos, a single transmission was sent from the Sol system. It was not a declaration of victory. It was not a message of conquest. It was simply a warning, a recorded message from an unknown human figure, broadcasted across every Dominion world, every major empire, every trading hub in the galaxy. The figure was calm, unshaken. Their voice carried no arrogance, no hatred, just an undeniable certainty. We were willing to live in peace. We warned you. You thought we were weak. You thought we were easy prey. Now you understand. This was not a war. This was a lesson. Do not make us teach it again. The message ended. No threats. No ultimatums. And yet, across every empire, the reaction was the same. Terror. Because the silence that followed was not the silence of diplomacy. It was the silence of a predator watching its prey, waiting, deciding. With the Dominion in shambles, the remaining galactic powers held emergency meetings. The unspoken question hung over every council chamber, every war room. What do we do now? No one dared move against humanity. No one even considered retaliation. Instead, treaties were rewritten. Borders were adjusted. For the first time in history, humanity was not seen as an outsider species. They were seen as the new power in the galaxy. No proclamations were needed. No invasions. Because everyone understood one undeniable truth. You do not make an enemy of humanity. Because if you do, you may not live to regret it. Something that had remained hidden during the war. Something that had never dared to challenge the Dominion. Not because they were strong, but because it had been waiting for the right moment. The rise of humanity was not the end of galactic conflict. It was the beginning of something much greater. And humanity? Humanity was ready. The galaxy had changed. Not in cycles, not in slow political shifts, but in one single event. In one battle, the balance of power had collapsed. And humanity? Humanity had become something else entirely. Not conquerors, not rulers, but something far worse to those who had once seen them as weak. They had become the unknown. Something the galaxy could no longer predict, no longer measure, no longer control. And in the silence that followed, as the Dominion crumbled and the great empires of the stars watched in uneasy horror, one question remained unanswered. Had humanity truly shown its full hand, or had they only revealed a fraction of what they were capable of? The Dominion did not fall in fire. It did not burn in war. It rotted from within. Within weeks of the failed invasion, entire Dominion fleets began defecting. Not just out of fear of humanity, but because they saw the weakness in their own leadership. The supreme strategist, Varsak, once considered the greatest mind in the Dominion's history, was found dead in his war chambers. Official reports claimed suicide. But the truth? The truth was whispered in the dark corridors of the Dominion's remaining warlords. Varsak had been eliminated by his own generals because they needed a scapegoat, because they refused to accept that they had been outmatched. That their empire, which had dominated the stars for centuries, had been brought to its knees by a species they had once dismissed as barely sentient. The Dominion's ruling class fractured overnight. Governors abandoned their posts. Commanders took their fleets and vanished into the uncharted void, seeking to carve out their own rule before the entire empire collapsed. And one by one, Dominion-controlled worlds declared independence. Not because they wanted freedom, but because they feared what would happen if humanity ever turned its eyes toward them again. The galaxy waited. After the Dominion's defeat, every empire, every species, every surviving fleet braced for what they believed was coming next. The human expansion. They expected humanity to seize power, to march their war fleets into the vacuum left behind by the Dominion's fall, to take revenge on the species that had once mocked them, hunted them, and finally tried to exterminate them. But none of that happened. Humanity did not move. They did not send warships. They did not demand territory. They simply remained. They watched. They listened, and they waited, and that was what terrified the galaxy the most, because it meant that humanity had not fought for power. They had not fought for conquest. They had fought to prove a point that every species in the galaxy now understood with chilling certainty. You do not make an enemy of Earth. And that simple truth, more than any fleet, more than any weapon, became the new foundation of galactic law. The greatest mystery of all was what happened to the warforms, the entities that had erased the Dominion fleet, the unseen force that had rewritten the very concept of warfare in the span of a single battle. No wreckage was ever found. No energy signatures remained. Even the Dominion's most advanced intelligence divisions, despite all their surviving data, could find no evidence that the warforms had ever existed. It was as if humanity's most powerful weapons had simply disappeared. Which led to one terrifying question that no empire dared ask aloud. Had humanity used them all, or had they simply turned them off? And if they had turned them off, what would it take to turn them back on? A gathering was called. Not by humanity, but by the rest of the galactic powers. The Dominion's remnants, the coalition of free worlds, the elder councils of the core systems, every major species that had once dictated the course of the galaxy assembled in secret. They needed a new balance, a new set of rules, a new way to prevent humanity from ever seeing them as a threat again. The result? The First Contact Treaty. A set of unspoken laws that every surviving empire quietly agreed upon. No fleet shall ever enter human space without invitation. No world shall ever claim territory in the Sol sector or its surrounding systems. No species shall act against humanity, directly or indirectly. And the final most important rule: if humanity ever goes to war again, let it be against someone else. Because no empire, no matter how powerful, no matter how vast, wanted to find out what else Earth had hidden away. Months after the war's end, a single message was sent from Earth. Not a declaration, not a warning, but an offer. A single transmission, broadcasted across every major galactic network, in every known language. It came with no images, no demands, just a single statement. The galaxy has feared war for too long. Perhaps it is time we build something greater. And with that, humanity went silent once more. No follow-ups. No further explanations. Just an open door. The galaxy was left to wonder. Had humanity truly meant peace, or was this simply the next step in their game? And if it was, what exactly were they planning? Something that had remained silent, hidden. Something that had watched the rise and fall of empires for thousands of years, and for the first time, it had turned its gaze toward Earth. Because if humanity could destroy the Dominion in a single battle, then perhaps they were finally worthy of something far greater. Something beyond war, beyond conquest. Perhaps humanity was finally ready to know the truth. And as deep space signals echoed in the void, carrying strange messages toward Earth's borders, one thing became clear. The war was over. But humanity's greatest challenge had only just begun.